Okay, so let's talk about assignment number 5. If you remember, the project that we're working on has a couple of parts, right? We worked on first the logging in and registering early on in the semester. Then we worked on the faculty side of the application, where faculty can create content, right? They can add widgets and courses and modules and lessons and topics, and then we started working on the student's point of view, right? And that as we switched over between implementing the different parts, we used different stacks, right? So first we did React with Java with MySQL. When we switched over to the mean stack with Angular, Node.js, and MongoDB. So we're gonna stick at working with this latest stack, the mean stack, and keep working on the student's point of view, the applications from the student's point of view. For this assignment, we're going to add the capability of users being able to take an online quiz, right? So that's we're going to be implementing a schema that describes quizzes that a student might take, and where you have any number of quizzes, and the quizzes might have a title and a list of questions, right? The questions might be of different types. There might be essay questions where they have to fill out a long form text. They have fill in the blanks where they might have some text, and then some boxes where they have to fill in the values. Then you have a true/false, which is just maybe a checkbox whether the question is true or false. And then you have a multiple choice where you're giving 4 or 5 choices from where you have to select the one that is correct. Okay, so there's different types of questions, and here is represented using an inheritance diagram where you have a base class of question, and then you have 4 subclasses that are inheriting from question. You have the base class. Question has some common attributes, such as the title of the question, how many points is the question worth, a description, and then it has a discriminator field called question type that lets it know which question, what type of question am I, and depending on that discriminator, the UI can decide to render one way or another, right? Very much like we did for widgets, right? Where you had a widget base class and then you have many subclasses that implemented the widget. Well, similar here. We also have students being able to submit a quiz, and so for every time they can take the quiz any number of times, right? And every time they submit a quiz, a record is created of that particular submission, right? With that submission has a reference back to which quiz is this submission for, right? Who made the submission? This particular student made this submission for that particular quiz. And then it has a reference to the answers the answers that the student gave for a particular question. Right? So each answer, so submission contains an array of answers, right? Because these are all the answers that the submission contains, and the answers are records that reference what answers is for what question in a particular quiz. So you can reference and say, oh, it's that question that I have an answer for. Okay, it's a denormalized model that has a reference to the original base question, but it has answers for all. Depending on the type of the question, it has an answer. If it was a true and false question, it has a true and false answer. If it was a multiple choice answer, it has the index of the right of what did the student choose, right? Which choice did the student choose from the multiple choice question? The fill in the blank answer. This is a comma separated string, right? Of what did the user answer for the different blanks, right? If there were 3 blanks, then the student answered 3 words or 3 phrases, comma separated. Yes? And then you have an essay answer, which is a long string that they might have written several paragraphs to answer an essay question. That makes sense? Okay. So this first part of the assignment asks you to implement a schema, a mongoose schema, very much what we worked on, introduced last week, to implement this data model, right? So we'll create a schema. Now that schema, we are only suggesting here that that you implement the schema in a particular file under models, quiz.schema.server.js, but you're free to implement a much more normalized schema, right? It doesn't have to be a flat schema. It could be either embedded schemas or whether you want to split it up into multiple collections or single collections. So we'll work through those, right? Deciding on how is it that we can implement that, right? Whatever you choose, you should follow the naming convention. If you choose to, for instance, implement each quiz type in its own schema, right? Then you'll need to implement your own model / multiple choice / multiple choice.schema.server, right? If you choose to do that, right? So depending how you decide to implement the schema, you'll need to implement those .schema.js files and the model.js files that go along with those as well, right? So you're over here says feel free to modify the schema as needed. So if you find that there's something wrong with the schema, that you'd like to add an attribute in there, then feel free to add it, right? Do not collapse the entire schema into a single class, right? Please don't do that. But if you find that you need an additional field, feel free to add that. Also, add, combine, or embed mongoose schema and models as needed, right? So we're leaving that up to you, those kinds of design decisions, right? And I don't imagine that everybody will have the same exact design, right? So I'm pretty sure. Although feel free to reuse whatever design we come up here in class. Okay. All right. So that's the first part. That's creating the schema and models, the data model. That's using Mongoose, MongoDB, and whatnot. We also ask you to insert into this brand new schema. Right? Insert using Mongo, the Mongo client. Create 2 quizzes. Right? Two sample quizzes of your choice. Right? Maybe you can choose use one of my quizzes from the ones we've used so far. You can use that as an example. But each quiz must contain at least 1 instance of each question type. So the quiz needs to have an essay question, a fill-in-the-blank question, a true and false question, and a multiple choice question. Okay? Right. As an example, you can use the wireframes that are shown below. I'm going to show you in a minute. You can use that as an example quiz, although it's pretty boring. It's very generic quizzes. So you can choose your own quizzes. All right. So that's the schema and the models. Then you're asked to create a RESTful API that allows you to retrieve these quizzes that you just created, right? That are now living in the database. You're asked to create 2 APIs, one for retrieving all the quizzes, right, the entire list of quizzes, and the other one is allow you to retrieve a particular quiz, right? So if you know the ID of the quiz, it retrieves the entire quiz. Now this one, the get API quiz, retrieves the list of quizzes, but only retrieves the title for the quizzes. Okay, only the title, meaning it returns only this, right? This quiz over here, only the title. It does not retrieve the questions. Okay? The second API, where you provide a particular quiz ID, right? If you give me the quiz ID, I will retrieve the quiz, but I will also retrieve everything else. The list of questions, right? And for each question, I'll retrieve the fill in the blanks and the true and false and the choice and the multiple choice, everything below it. Okay? We don't know how to do that yet. All right, we'll learn how to do that. If you're using SQL, you would have to do a join, right? You would have to join these two tables and join all the tables and then retrieve all the fields, right, and reconstruct all that. Well, there is no join in Mongo. Okay, so we'll have to learn how to do that, right? How to retrieve things. So anyway, so that's this question right here. So this is retrieve the single quiz whose primary key is QID. Response includes all quiz properties, including all questions and their details. So everything. To retrieve a particular quiz and retrieves everything underneath. Okay? All right. If you feel that you need other services, right? Maybe you need a post or you need a delete in there. Feel free to add additional queries in there, right? But the ones that are required are these two. Okay. Any questions? All right. Okay. So that's 20 points for that. All right. So the next thing is using the API you just built in the previous section, right? Using these APIs, create an Angular component called QuizList component. That if you navigate to /quizzes, right? If you navigate to /quizzes, it lists all the quizzes that are available. Okay, and they can be. You're free to render them any way you want. If you want to render them as lists, or as tables, or as cards, right? You can choose to be creative there. Once it's rendered, it'll have two links. Each quiz will have two links or two buttons. Right? One of the buttons will allow a student to take the quiz. Initiate the student taking the actual quiz. Right. The other one will allow to see the students all the submissions that the student has submitted so far. Right. So, for instance, if I've taken the quiz, I can look at the history of all the times that I've taken this quiz, right? And perhaps also the grading, right? This quiz has been graded, and what grade did I get, in this particular submission? Make sense? So two links. One of the links is called take. Although if you want to rename it to something more creative, two links. One is the take link that allows you to take the quiz. And the other one is a submissions link that allows you to see a history for that particular student. What have they submitted? Make sense? Right. Obviously, this assumes that the student has logged in, and that the session is stored in the server. The server knows who's currently logged in. Right. So if somebody takes a quiz, then we'll know who took what quiz. Yes. Right, it will be able to create this relationship. Right, so notice that here's a relationship of the student having submitted a quiz. Right, so this relationship, the student, we know who they are because they've logged in, and the submission we know when they've submitted it and when they have posted a submission. Okay, any questions there? Right, that's pretty easy. Then the next one is we'd like to be able to, if you click on the take, if you click on the take link, click on the take link, it should navigate to /quiz and then the ID of the quiz. You should see the particular quiz that you just clicked on, right? And it should start, start you up on taking that quiz. And that quiz is going to be rendered by a component called quiz component. So that quiz component is going to iterate over all the types of questions Right? It's gonna go out to the server. Now that I know the ID of the quiz, it's going to go out to the server and say, retrieve for me the whole quiz object, right? And that quiz object is going to have all the questions, right? And based on those questions, the component is going to just iterate over those types of questions and render them depending on the type of questions, right? If it's an essay question, it'll render one way. If it's a multiple choice, it'll render them a different way. If it's true and false, it'll render a different way, right? So depending on what type of question, it'll render differently. Okay. Okay. So as a let's see. So if it's a true or false question, they should all render the title of the question, maybe on the left-hand side. The number of points maybe on the right-hand side, all right, and maybe the description, the instructions of the questions below it, right? And then the actual user interface for you to be able to answer the question. Yes, right. If it's a true and false, we're suggesting that you give us two checkboxes, or I'm sorry, two radio buttons, and you choose true or false. Okay, and then right, so that's for the true and false question, right? For the essay question, again, the wireframe should be fairly similar to each other. On the left-hand side, it should render the title of the question. On the right-hand side, it should render the number of points that question is worth, and then a description right below it. Right, saying that Now these descriptions that I'm showing here as samples, they're not only dummy text, right, but they're actually describing what the widget looks like. This is an example of an essay question. All questions have a paragraph, such as this one, that explains the question. Right. I'd rather not. You don't use this text. It's pretty generic, right? So use an actual quiz question. Maybe you can use them from the ones with quizzes that you've taken from this course or any other course. And down below, since this is an essay question, down below it has a text area box where folks can type in their answer, their long form essay answer. Make sense? Okay. The next one is the renderable multiple choice question. So if it's multiple choice, again, it'll have the title on the left-hand side, it'll have the points on the right-hand side, then a description, and down below, it's going to iterate over the array of choices, and for each choice, it'll render as several checkboxes, right? Several checkboxes, and with each text of the choice. Right. Now, as a user selects any one of these, it should highlight the choice, and then obviously check the radio button that you've selected. Okay. So that's for the multiple choice question. And finally, we have the fill in the blank question. Is one of the tougher ones. Again, you have a title on the left-hand side. You have the number of points on the right-hand side, a description, right? And then as part of the description, you can the user, the faculty presumably, might have used a format to fill in the blanks, right? To generate the fill in the blanks, right? So the faculty might have chosen the following: some text, and then some square brackets where that the client is going to use to render this as an input field. Okay, so, for instance, if the faculty might have chosen this, right? The Angular client is actually going to render that. Okay. So free-form text, 2 plus 2, there it is, 2 plus 2 equal, 2 plus 2 equal. And then the square brackets, right, the square brackets substituted by an input field. See that? Okay, and then new line, square brackets, right, substituted by an input field, and then followed by some just some text. That make sense? Right. I would be okay with you using a simpler solution to this, right? For instance, here I'm suggesting instead of square brackets, you can choose a different strategy to identify variables and their correct answers. Okay? For instance, you might choose to have a text or variable in a separate line and distinguishing variables as beginning with a special character, okay, or as an asterisk. For instance, an alternative to this might have been this. You have a text area. So in a text area, right, right, you might let somebody type the following: 2 plus 2 equal, right, followed by the name of a field, right, the right value, okay, followed by and you prepend these with an asterisk, right? With an asterisk saying, "Hey, that's a variable, right? That's a variable." Followed by 2 equal 2, and then followed by plus 2 equal 4. Wait, what? Plus. There we go. Right, so that would be an okay solution, right? Obviously, this is much cooler solution, right? The reason you need 4 and 2, you need variables, is so that when it gets submitted in the database, whatever the user submits, whatever the student submits, you need to be able to distinguish, saying, for the placeholder called 2, they submitted this value, and for the placeholder 4, they submitted this other value. Right, so that it can be graded on the server side. Make sense? Okay. All right. So that's one of the more complex ones. We'll take a look at on how to implement that. Finally, you'll need a component. You'll need a quiz component that goes along with this, so that you can click on submit. Submit the entire quiz, right? And all these text areas, the check boxes, the radio buttons. The text area that you filled in, the true false that you selected, all that needs to be captured in a component and then submitted right to the server. Okay? And we'll see how to do that. And when you submit, right, it'll take all the data that you submitted and it will post it to the server. Right? It'll post it to the server and say, this is what user so and so submitted for quiz XYZ. Make sense? All right. All right. Awesome. All right. So that's the take. That's the take user interface. The other one was, if you remember, each quiz had a link to take the quiz, and another link to be able to look at the submissions. Right, the submissions that folks submitted for a particular quiz. Yes, right. So those submissions are going to be implemented by a component called quiz submissions. Right, so I can see, what did I get? What did I get? What are all the submissions that I got? Right. So in this one, it's going to be mapped to the following URL, right, /quiz ID. And then followed by submissions, right? And that's going to render the quiz submissions, right? So what that's going to do is going to say, okay, well, let me go fetch for that particular quiz. What are the submissions that the currently logged in user has submitted, right? So remember, the currently logged in user still lives on the server, right? So you're going to say, okay, well, for this user, let me look at all the submissions that they've submitted for that particular quiz. and it's going to show a listing of all the submissions that that user has submitted. Okay. Okay. If you select a particular submission, if you click on a particular submission, it will navigate to a quiz answers that will show all your answers. What did you submit? What did you answer? Right. So you can look at perhaps look at what you answered and what was the correct answer was. Yes. So you can see. It'll highlight perhaps the correct answer, and then maybe put a check mark saying that you got it right, or a red X saying you got it wrong, because what you answered doesn't match what the right answer was. Okay. All right. So that's the client side. That's the on the Angular side. On the server side, you'll need data models for the submissions. Right? You create a schema for the submissions and a model that goes along with it. So that you'll implement in a schema called submission.schema.server, and you'll expose the services in a following services model. Right? Submission.service.server will allow you to post a new submission. So the currently logged in user will be able to post a new submission for a particular quiz. Right? So probably student ID is not necessary, right? Yeah, no. We don't need that, right? Because we can we know the ID of the current logged in user, right? So it would be redundant to have to pass the ID of the student, right? I'm logged in. It's a submission for myself. Same thing here. If I can retrieve all the submissions, right? Get API quiz. So for getting a list of submission from the student, or I can retrieve. So this shows all the submission that a student has made for a particular quiz, or this one retrieves a particular submission, right? That particular submission that the student submitted for that particular quiz. Make sense? All right. And finally, there's a bonus, a 10-point bonus to actually grade the quiz. Give me a grade based on what I submitted, and what the right answers were. Right? So if I go to a particular submission, the components should be able to give me a grade. Right? This is what you got based on what you submitted and what the right answers were. Make sense? Any questions? All right.